Look at these streets: a theater, public baths, a library, stone roads laid out with almost mathematical precision. If I told you this was once one of the great cities of the Roman world, you might imagine Italy. But this is not Italy. This is Algeria. On the edge of the Ore Mountains are the remains of a city called Timgad. And hidden among these ruins is a story much stranger than the usual story of Romans conquering Africa. Because eventually, the soldiers defending Roman Africa were increasingly born in Africa. A man from Numidia would command Roman Britain and push Roman armies into Scotland. A man born in what is now Constantine would teach Marcus Aurelius how to master Latin rhetoric. And centuries later, after Roman rule in the West had collapsed, a mysterious ruler in the Aures would leave behind an inscription containing an extraordinary title: Imperator, Emperor. So perhaps we have been asking the wrong question. Perhaps the mystery is not, what were Romans doing in Algeria? Perhaps it is, who were the Romans of Algeria? In the year 100 AD, the Emperor Trajan founded a colony here. Its official name was Colonia Marciana Traiana Thamugadi. Today, we call it Timgad. From above, its original plan still looks astonishing. Two great streets crossed near its center. Smaller streets divided the city into an ordered grid. Rome had placed one of its ideal cities on Numidian soil. But Timgad did not remain a small military settlement. It prospered so quickly that by the middle of the 2nd century, the city had already broken beyond the boundaries of its original plan. New temples appeared, new markets, large houses, and public baths. Archaeologists can still identify 14 bathing complexes at Timgad. There was water infrastructure, drainage beneath the city, public lavatories. There was even a public library, and inscription records that a wealthy citizen named Julius Quintianus Flavius Rogatianus donated 400,000 sesterces to build it. But perhaps the most revealing inscription at Timgad is not about an emperor. It is about ordinary life. Carved into the forum is an ancient message associated with a gaming board. It roughly says, to hunt, to bathe, to play, to laugh. This is life. For a moment, the ruins stopped feeling ancient. Almost 2,000 years ago, someone stood here wanting many of the same simple things people want today. But Timgad was only half of this world. To understand who protected it, we have to leave the city and travel to another extraordinary place, Lambaesis. Lambaesis was the great base of Rome's 3rd Augustan Legion, Legio III Augusta. This was the army that guarded Roman power across this part of North Africa. And in the summer of AD 128, it received a visitor, Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian did not simply pass through. He watched the soldiers train. Cavalry maneuvered across the ground. Men threw spears. Others demonstrated construction work and military engineering. And then the emperor addressed them. Normally, an emperor's voice disappears the moment he dies. But something remarkable happened here. Hadrian's words were carved into a monumental inscription on the parade ground. Fragments still preserve his comments on spear throwing, cavalry exercises, construction, and military discipline. Scholars regard the Lambaesis addresses as exceptionally important surviving evidence for an emperor speaking directly to his army. Almost 19 centuries later, stone in Algeria still carries echoes of a Roman emperor inspecting his soldiers. But the soldiers themselves lead us to a much bigger surprise. When people imagine Roman Algeria, they often imagine one simple picture: Romans on one side, Africans on the other, foreign soldiers occupying a conquered country. Early in Roman rule, there was certainly conquest, resistance, and enormous violence. But an empire that survives for centuries changes the societies inside it. And eventually, those lines become difficult to draw. Researchers studying inscriptions from Legio III Augusta have reconstructed where identifiable soldiers came from. Between AD 117 and 161, more than half of the soldiers whose origins are known came from North Africa. Then something remarkable happens between AD 161 and 192. That figure reaches approximately 95%. That does not mean we know the precise ethnicity of every soldier. North African is a geographical origin, and ancient identities were complicated. But it tells us something extremely important. By this period, the Roman army stationed in Africa was no longer simply an army of outsiders. The empire was increasingly recruiting its soldiers from Roman Africa itself. Men born in Africa were wearing Roman armor, receiving Roman pay, serving Roman emperors, and calling themselves part of a Roman political world. And some of them traveled very, very far from home. One of those stories begins in Numidia. His name was Quintus Lollius Urbicus. He was born here, in North Africa. Yet his career would eventually carry him to almost the opposite end of the Roman world. Urbicus became a senator, a consul, a general, and eventually governor of Roman Britain. Around AD 139, he led Roman forces north into what is now Scotland. After reoccupying the Scottish lowlands, his administration began construction of the Antonine Wall, Rome's new northern frontier. Think about the reversal for a moment. We often picture Europeans traveling south to command Africa. But almost 1900 years ago, a man from Numidia traveled north and commanded Roman forces in Britain. And he was not the only North African reaching the highest levels of Roman society. At Cirta, modern Constantine, another extraordinary Roman African was born, Marcus Cornelius Fronto. Fronto became one of the most celebrated Latin orators of his generation. He moved to Rome, entered the Senate, became consul, and was chosen to teach Latin rhetoric to two future emperors, Lucius Verus, and one of the most famous Romans who ever lived, Marcus Aurelius. So one of history's great symbols of classical Rome was being educated in Roman eloquence by a man born in ancient Algeria. At this point, the categories begin to collapse. Where does African end and Roman begin? Rome itself was changing the answer. For centuries, Roman citizenship had slowly spread beyond the city of Rome. Then, in AD 212, Emperor Caracalla made a decision that transformed the empire. Roman citizenship was extended to virtually the entire free population of the Roman Empire. Being Roman had never been the same thing as belonging to a modern ethnic group. Now that became clearer than ever. A person could come from Numidia, speak Latin, follow local traditions, worship gods whose roots reached far deeper into Africa, serve in a Roman legion, hold Roman citizenship, and still belong to several identities at once. Timgad was, therefore, not simply a little piece of Italy copied into Africa. It was becoming part of something much harder for us to imagine today, an African-Roman world. But then that world began to break apart, and what happened next may be the strangest part of the story. During the 5th century, Roman political control in the Western Mediterranean collapsed. New powers emerged across North Africa. The Vandals established a kingdom. Old imperial structures fragmented. To generations of historians, this was the end of Roman rule. But deep in the Ore Mountains, something survived. In 1941, near Arras, an inscription came to scholarly attention commemorating a mysterious Christian ruler named Mastes. The inscription is difficult. Its Latin is rough. Its interpretation remains debated. But two titles are visible in the text: Dux, a military leader, and then Imperator. The inscription says Mastes had been dux for 67 years and Imperator for 40. It also describes his loyalty in relation to both Romans and Moors. Early scholars proposed an extraordinary interpretation. Perhaps after the fall of the Western Roman Emperor in AD 476, a local ruler in the Aures adopted the title of emperor himself. That interpretation is not universally accepted. We should not pretend that archaeology has discovered a forgotten Algerian Roman Empire. It hasn't, but that makes the inscription more intriguing, not less. Why was a local Christian ruler in the Aures still using the political language of Rome after imperial rule in the West had collapsed? Why Imperator? What exactly was Mastes claiming to be? Perhaps Rome had disappeared from the map before it disappeared from people's minds. Decades before that inscription was made, another North African had already described what centuries of Roman rule had done to identity. Augustine of Hippo. In AD 416, speaking in Roman Africa, Augustine asked, "Who now knows? Which nations in the Roman Empire were what when all have become Romans?" That sentence changes the way we should look at Timgad, because perhaps the people walking these streets cannot be divided neatly into the categories we use today. Conqueror, native, European, African, Roman, Berber. Those identities could overlap. Local culture did not simply disappear, but neither was Rome forever, something foreign standing outside African society. After centuries, millions of people had been born inside the Roman system. To them, Rome was not necessarily a distant city in Italy. Rome was the world they lived in. Today we call this place Roman Algeria. The phrase sounds simple, almost as if two completely separate worlds briefly touched. Rome and Algeria. But the stones tell a more complicated story. An emperor spoke to his army here, and his words survived. The legion guarding these lands became increasingly North African. A Numidian rose to command Roman Britain. A man from Cirta taught the future emperor Marcus Aurelius. Roman citizenship eventually extended across almost the entire free population of the empire. And even after Western imperial government collapsed, a mysterious ruler in the Aures was still using the language of Roman authority. So perhaps Timgad is not remarkable simply because Rome came to Africa. Perhaps it is remarkable because over generations something new happened here. Africa became part of Rome, and Rome became part of Africa